What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 13 waiver wire ads. We finally made it past the bye week. So you're gonna have your entire roster to work with from this point on. Because of that, your waiver wire strategy should be changing a bit moving forward. We're not really looking for guys to pick up and spot start or who could be flex viable on occasion because the bye weeks are gone. You've got everyone on your roster. So it's not really worth trying to find guys who maybe you'll use in the flex. What we should instead be doing is looking for handcuffs with upside. So those are the players I'll mostly be going over. I'll still touch on some wide receivers. And of course, we're still going to go over quarterback and defense streamers. All right, let's start things off at running back with Rashaad Penny. He's likely going to be the most popular ad this week, but for good reason. He's a very talented running back. He's been very hyped up over the last 2 seasons, and when he's been healthy and gotten the touches, he's been really good. I've mentioned throughout the season that Chris Carson does have a fumbling issue, and he was benched yet again this week, or I guess this past week, for fumbling another time. This does not mean that Penny is a starter moving forward. They benched Carson, they switched to Penny, and because he was playing really good, they stuck with him. But as we've seen before, Carson will get benched in one game, then come right back out the next week as the starter. However, there's absolutely a chance that they come to more of a split moving forward, and if he fumbles again or gets injured at some point, then you're looking at a running back one in Penny. So if you own Carson, you 100% need to grab Penny as a backup, and even if you don't, he is a great upside piece because, like I said, running back one if he were to take over. I want to go over both Scarbrough because 44% of leagues added him last week, and I'm pretty sure around 15 to 20% more will add him this week. And the issue I have with him and why I said not to add him last week, why I don't think you should add him this week, is because, one, he doesn't have a catch yet. He's got, I believe, 1 target, and he's likely to only finish with 1 or 2 receptions at the most. So for him to be worth starting, he's going to need to have like over 60 rushing yards and to score a touchdown. And while that almost happened this week, he had a really good game and he still only scored 9.8 points under any format in basically the perfect setup. They didn't win, but it was close for most of the game, if not all of the game, until the game-winning field goal, and they were playing a bad defense. But they closed the season playing the Bears, at Minnesota, against Tampa Bay, and then at Denver. And I cannot imagine you'd be starting him in any of those matchups, regardless of who you have at running back. Even if you're desperate, can you honestly see yourself starting him in any of those 4 matchups? I can't, and that's why I still do not think you should be adding him. I made Jonathan Williams the top ad last week, but he was only added in 29% of leagues, maybe because it was the Thursday game and some people, I don't know, don't add until later in the week or something. But for the 70% of you in leagues where he is still available, you're going to need to add him. Don't expect what you saw on Thursday night to happen again. He had 29 touches, which is a number that they've given Marlon Mack just once in his 36 career games. But he looked really good. He had some fantastic runs, and he's gonna be the starter for as long as Mack is out. So he's a top handcuff even when Mack returns, and since we don't know exactly how long that's gonna be, you definitely want to try and get him on your team. Alexander Mattison is still a must-own if you have Dalvin Cook. I'm sure a lot of you have been riding Cook into the playoffs, but if something were to happen to him, then Mattison would see a massive boost in touches. So just make sure you're not screwed if he goes down. Tony Pollard is the exact same thing with Zeke. You own Zeke, you have to own Pollard. He would be a top 5 running back if Zeke were to ever get hurt. And honestly, it would be a 1-for-1, if not better. I'm not kidding when I say this. You own Zeke. If Zeke goes down and you insert Pollard, you should be expecting the exact same fantasy production. Maybe he's not as good on the ground, but since he is so good in the receiving game, he's going to get a ton of targets, a ton of receptions. He'll be just as good, if not better, in fantasy. So because of that, even if you don't own Zeke, honestly, at this point in the season, Pollard needs to be owned in far more leagues than he is. Benny Snell is a great add if you have James Conner. He's not going to be involved in the receiving game, but he just had 21 carries, and he looked pretty good on those carries. It was the perfect matchup, so take the performance with a grain of salt, but they do face Cleveland, Arizona, and Buffalo over the next 3 weeks, all pretty solid matchups for running backs. So not expecting, 21 carries for 100 yards every week, but he's definitely a guy that needs to be added. Darrell Williams is also a good add if you've been using Damien or McCoy. We'll need to see how much Damien and McCoy practice this week before really knowing if Darrell Williams is going to be a good add, which is why I'd say you're not claiming Darrell, and honestly I wouldn't even try and add him until we know for sure. But if it kind of looks like there's a possibility that Damien and McCoy will miss, well then you need to go grab Darrell Williams. This one isn't as much of a priority as the ones I already mentioned, just because you're going to need both Damien and McCoy to be out. But if you're in a competitive league, all those guys are already taken, then it's not a bad idea to add him, especially if it looks like both of them may miss. I would make sure that you own Wayne Gallman if you're a Saquon Barkley owner. Barkley did say that he will not be shut down to end the season, but we can't say for 100% certainty that that's true. And if they do choose to shut him down for, say, the final 2 weeks of the season, well, you've got a fantastic replacement in Wayne Gallman. Then the final two are Malcolm Brown and Ryquell Armstead. Both are pure handcuffs, but they carry massive upside if Gurley or Fournette were to get injured. So if you own either of those two, then I'd make sure to grab their respective backup. I don't think I missed any big ones, but if you know of a handcuff that I didn't go over and you want to add him just to be safe, then it's likely not a bad idea. Remember, I'm not saying that you should drop your entire bench for all of these guys. You still will have times where you don't want to play, say, a wide receiver versus the Patriots or the 49ers, so you're going to have to look to your bench schedules and see, will you need replacements? But if you've got a guy on the bench that you know you're not going to be using unless your players just get decimated by injuries, I'd prefer using that spot for a handcuff. At wide receiver, we don't really do handcuffs. That's not how the position works, but I'll go over a few guys. Just know that you shouldn't really be relying on the waiver wire for wide receivers at this point in the season. The top ad would be Randall Cobb, who is somehow still just 40% owned. He has 8, 7, and 7 targets over the last month, and he's produced really solid stat lines over his last 3. His schedule isn't easy by any means, but there shouldn't be players getting as much involvement in their offense as he is on the waiver wire. So definitely a nice guy to add. Deebo Samuel has looked great over the last month. I'm loving it because he's my highest owned player in best ball, but I also know that a lot of his production was because Sanders and Kittle were out and limited. He only had 2 targets last night when both of them returned, which he did turn into 2 for 50 and a touchdown, but it was only 2 targets. So he's a fine add, but he's clearly the wide receiver 2, and Kittle gets more than both of those guys, and they're a run first team. So by no means is he a must add, but definitely a guy, if you need a wide receiver, you can look at him. And the only other wide receiver I'd consider is Robby Anderson. He hasn't been amazing lately, but he had a solid game on Sunday, and he faces the Bengals and Dolphins over his next 2 weeks. So if you really need a flex play with big upside, let's say this week you're looking at your team and you're like, man, I've got solid pieces and the projection is fine, but none of these guys have 102 touchdown upside, and I'm a huge underdog in a must-win game. Under that scenario where you just need to add someone who's got huge upside that can have you upset a better opponent, then I would look at Robby Anderson because he could absolutely go off in both of his next 2 matchups. Other than that, you could look at guys like Beasley, A.J. Brown, Slayton, but I don't really see a path to you starting them, so they're fine, but not great. At tight end, we do have a few options, and Jack Doyle should be the top claim. Eric Ebron will miss the remainder of the season with surgery on both ankles, so Doyle should bump up to the mid-70s. Maybe he pushes 80% snap share with a stable target share and a solid role in the red zone. He is a tight end 1 for the remainder of the season, and he's available in more than 55% of leagues. Dallas Goedert is still only 36% owned somehow. Their entire wide receiver core is just decimated with injuries, so they've been leaning on Ertz and Goedert in the receiving game. He's been getting 5 to 8 targets a week, and he has a really big red zone role. Plus, he faces Miami, the Giants, and Washington over the next 3 weeks. So definitely got to add if you need a tight end. Then we've got Hollister and Noah Fant. Both of these guys had pretty bad weeks, but they should do better to close the season. Hollister is really the only receiving option they have at tight end. He's been the only healthy tight end recently, but even if other guys get healthy, he's their only receiving option that they have. And the Broncos have been looking for ways to get Noah Fant more involved. The Bills are one of the toughest tight end matchups there is, so it's not that surprising that Fant struggled this past week. Doyle and Goedert are the better options than Fant moving forward, and I'd have Hollister and Goedert on a pretty similar level, with Doyle again being the top tight end to go after. The last tight end I'll mention is David Njoku. He might return this week, but I'm more looking at weeks 14 and 15 when he faces the Bengals and the Cardinals, who are both fantastic matchups for tight ends. Let's move on to quarterback streamers, and there are a few pretty good options this week. We've got Nick Foles versus the Bucks. Matt Ryan looked terrible last week, but this is still one of the top pass funnels in the league, so Foles should push for 300 or more passing yards and has a good chance for multiple scores. On top of that, I would view him personally as the top streaming option. Right behind him, we have Kirk Cousins at Seattle. Seattle has looked a lot better as of late, but they also just dominated an Eagles offense that was down Jordan Howard, Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, Nelson Aguilar. I mean, it does not take an elite defense to slow down Jordan Matthews, Greg Ward, and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. So look for Cousins to post a solid stat line after coming off bye, especially if Thielen can get back on the field this week. Sam Darnold at Cincy is also an option. He has more than 20 fantasy points in 3 straight weeks, and the Bengals are dreadful on defense. Plus, if you add him, then you get him next week when he faces the Dolphins. But hopefully, you added him a month ago, like I said to. If all of those guys are taken, you can play Derek Carr at Kansas City. I have a lot less confidence in that play, but the Raiders are likely going to have to keep up, so there's a chance he's forced into one of the higher attempt games on the season. Let's move on to defense streamers, where the top option is the Eagles. They allowed 24 or more points in 6 of their first 7 weeks, but then haven't allowed more than 17 points since then. This week, they get to face the Dolphins. The Panthers also get a home matchup with Dwayne Haskins. He has 9 turnovers on the season, and it's not like he's made very many starts. The Panthers have not been good as of late, but a home matchup with Haskins should get them back on track. The Jets are also a decent add. They get to face the Bengals. Meanwhile, the Jets have 13 sacks over their last 3 weeks. All right, let's put these guys in order of waiver priority. So the order for claiming players is Jack Doyle, Jonathan Williams, Rashaad Penny, and Randall Cobb. Then the order for adding players is whatever quarterback stream you need, your defense streamer, then any of the running back handcuffs I mentioned that were not Jonathan Williams or Rashaad Penny. then one of the tight ends I mentioned if you don't get Jack Doyle, and then lastly, Deebo Samuel or Robby Anderson if you need a little bit more depth at wide receiver. So that is it for the Week 13 waiver wire video. Remember, if someone gets hurt in the Monday night game, then look at the pinned comment for any sort of update. I'll be doing start and sit for the running back position tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. But that's the end of this one. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? And if you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.